Hi, I'm Jay and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Twyla. As she is the daughter of the Boogeyman, that is a very universal concept that doesn't have a lot of defining characteristics, other than typically whatever is scariest to that household's children. So for my mood board, I pulled from what my childhood image of the Boogeyman was, which was the artwork from the Weird and Wild cards from the 90s. I always thought this guy was very scary. Also pulled from some images of monsters in the closet and monsters under the bed, all very typical boogie monster things that I wanted to pull from. So going with that bedroom pajama-esque inspiration, I used some images of floral pajamas and some pajamas styled into streetwear, along with also wanting to incorporate the idea of boogie monsters looking sort of like a pile of clothes. So I have this big comforter piece here, and the pile of clothes with a lot of layers and bulk reminding me of Mordecai. And I also want to take some inspiration from pastel goth, since that was always Twyla's vibe, as well as an image of Freddy Krueger, since he's always sort of referenced the idea of him being associated with dreams and all. So for her body type, I wanted to keep her short and chubby, but give her the addition of these really long clawed fingers, since that was always what I imagined the Boogeyman being as a kid. Just like long, scary hands that can reach out from under the bed or to the bed from the closet. Another thing about this design is that I kind of wanted to get away from how it feels like every Twyla iteration has been kind of the same design, so I definitely wanted to play with silhouette here a lot more. So for her first look, I had the idea of a baggy sweater with a cute little collar and some dust mite themed buttons, along with a floral skirt and some very long poofy hair that sort of mimics how I have the hairstyle of my Twyla doll. And keeping with the idea of dust and beds and the bugs that go under the bed, I also had the idea of adding bug hair clips into her head and giving her some bunny slippers with spiderweb heels. For the second look, I gave her a big comforter cloak with some spotted or patterned PJ pants and a Freddy Krueger shirt, along with an eye mask and some serious bedhead with a cowlick, as well as giving her a stylistic shadow over her eyes to highlight their glow in the darkness. For the third look, I went a little bit more sleek with two pigtails and some hair that hangs down over her face, almost sort of ring-esque. I also had the idea of giving her hanger-shaped earrings to give her that closet association, as well as a keyhole-shaped necklace, and then just a typical looking nightgown really, with some lacy slippers on the bottom. For the fourth look, I wanted to play with the idea of Hat Man and sleep paralysis demons, and I feel like that also fits into referencing Freddy Krueger. So I gave her a hat with some curly hair underneath and this big cloak that sort of mimics the trench coat of the Hat Man, but to keep it sort of cute and pastel goth, I also gave her some sweater paws and a long skirt that has shadow-like tendrils at the bottom of it. And then for the final thumbnail design here, I had the idea of closed curtain bangs with an off-the-sleeve tie-dye sweater and a stripy undershirt underneath, as well as a bracelet that has a little key on it, since she's always been associated with door handles and knobs and keyholes and such. Then just some plain stripy pajama pants and some slippers with some cute little bows with spiders at the tips. So I then took note of all my favorite aspects from these thumbnail designs to combine them into one. I wanted to keep her design somewhat simple and not be too overstyled to invoke the imagery of pajamas a lot more. I also really liked the hat idea. I thought it was pretty clever thematically, but I felt for her outfit it didn't quite fit in since I wanted her to look very loose and casual, so I opted to go for the sleep mask instead on top. For her shirt, I definitely wanted to keep the off-the-shoulder sweater since I originally came up with that back when I did a 2020 redesign of Twyla. So I wanted to take that and make it a lot baggier and looser and have it sit at about skirt length. I also gave it a jagged hem to make a visual reference to Freddy Krueger's sweater. And I also gave her a cuffed undershirt with long baggy striped sleeves that give her sweater paws over her big scary hands. For her skirt, I wanted it to be very cartoonishly shaped with a lot of pleating and a quilt-like pattern to call back to the bedsheet look of her outfit. I gave her the closed curtain bangs for her hairstyle with a big mess of long hair behind her that is full of cowlicks and curls, and I wanted it to give her that pile of clothes shadowy silhouette. I also gave her some shoes that have bows with little spiders on the tips with some shadowy heels. I also wanted her skirt to be reminiscent of a patchwork floral quilt, but I also like the idea of having her carry around a big blanket comforter, so I drew that in the little thumbnail on the side, and then I realized this design was very much giving me Hypnos from Hades, the video game, so I ended up scrapping the comforter idea. I also wanted to keep her color palette very tight and definitively in the realm of cool tones, so I made a little palette to the side to restrict myself to. I also liked the idea of tie-dye for her sweater, since in her diary she talks about seeing dreams as being sort of watercolor-esque. so I always had that visual association with her. Another design decision I made is that I wanted to give her a fairly dark hair color to again give her that shadowy, ephemeral look. I imagine her hair being kind of cloud-like and almost flowing like it's underwater when she does that thing where she disappears into the wall behind her. I also like the idea of her having her bangs pulled very close to her face, because it both draws attention to her glow-in-the-dark eyes, and it is also reflective of her character trait of being quite shy. Twyla's original design often had a dreamcatcher motif, which we can debate on its usage for sure, but it did always make me think that she was supposed to be native-coded, so I wanted to keep that and incorporate it into her facial features, and make reference to it by keeping a little spiderweb in the heel of her shoe. So moving on to coloring now, as always I do the line work traditionally, so I don't have footage or times for that, but I just started doing the flats here. The total redesign time for Twyla, not including the traditional line work, was 2 hours, 32 minutes, and 24 seconds, one of my quickest redesigns, likely because I tried to keep her outfit pretty simple. I wanted to keep her makeup pretty subtle, since I wanted her to, again, look like she was mostly in PJs. I feel like Twyla is a shy character who would also be the type to wear like Cookie Monster PJ pants to class. I also added in a bracelet with a key charm on it. I'm a big fan of this specific shade of aqua, and it is actually my favorite color. I wanted to keep her shoes kind of simple and slipper-like, and include some smoky patterns on the side. Also, I had to, of course, include Dustin in this piece. I always thought he was one of the cutest pets that they ever did in G1. I also imagined the platform of her heels being made out of slightly translucent black plastic. For her quilted skirt, I wanted to keep it just 2 different pieces of fabric, and so I ended up doing a checkered board pattern that reminded me almost of Harlequin. For the 2 fabrics used in her skirt, I wanted the mauve fabric to have this aqua swirling dust pattern on it, and for the pink one to be floral. Next, I'm just doing the tie-dye on her shirt. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and it was a lot of fun to do. I just did a plain background color of a desaturated aqua, and then went in with some blue dots here and there and the center and toward the sleeves, and then used the smudge tool to buff it out and create these really fun wavy shapes. I also then added some magenta to intensify and add some more depth to the stripes, and I also really like how wavy and funky it looks. I thought her hair was looking a little bit too dark, and I didn't want it to completely swallow up her design, so I decided to add some classic Monster High chunky highlights in the form of some aqua streaks throughout. And I definitely feel like this is when the piece started coming together in my mind. Finally starting to do the shading now, I wanted to keep that shadow over her eyes to again make her glowing eyes pop. And I wanted to include the gradient shadows that she has on her skin in G1, but given that her hair is dark and her shoes are dark, I couldn't find a good way to incorporate it into this piece specifically, but I do imagine her doll would have it. And that's also why I have her wearing double off-the-shoulder shirts, because I imagined the shadow tendrils would sort of end towards the shoulder area, and her hands would be a plain black. But again, given just the positioning of the hair and the pose, that ended up not looking too good when I tried to do it in this piece, so I ended up having it be aqua highlights and an aqua fingertip gradient for this rendering. Also, of course, I had to include a little bow on the front of her sweater in reference to all of her previous design iterations. I wanted her undershirt to have the same sort of vibe as a black and white striped shirt, since I feel like that's a very easy way to read Instagoth, but instead of using straight black and white, I use a light pink and a dark green to keep it in her color palette. I always really enjoy using funky colors to shade and highlight things. When I started shading the skirt, that's another moment when it started pulling together, because the skirt was definitely way too bright and saturated in the flats, so buffing it out and dulling it down with some dark purples and whites definitely helped. Now I'm just messing with the levels of each of my layers, and since the shading of the skirt ended up eating away at some of the patterns underneath, I went over with another layer on top of the shading, so that way the floral and dust patterns are a bit more readable. I also toyed around with the idea of adding a gradient to her overall design to help the colors unify a bit more, but in the end I decided to just keep messing with the layers until it looked right. For the background, I'm using a photo I took at a home furniture store of a bed with a checkered pattern that matches her skirt, and then adding the final little details of some sparkly highlights, and now it is time for the reveal. I'm really happy with how she turned out. I think her face is really cute, and the final color edits I did over on my Photos app definitely helped make those bright blues pop while still keeping her very monochromatic and shadowy. Her little hanger earrings are probably one of my favorite details in this piece. I also really like her big scary hands. I feel like it makes her read as like Boogeyman monster, since I feel like Boogeyman is something that's kind of hard to get to read, so I definitely think adding glowing eyes and big claws and a lumpy silhouette will help with that. Moving on to the comparison of Twyla from G1, 2, 3, and my redesign. I'm glad I was able to get away from the exact same silhouette that's been consistently recreated each generation, but I also think my design is a lot more similar to her original design than any of my previous redesigns. What can I say? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I also really like how her face turned out, and I feel like that's one thing that G3 definitely misses the opportunity on, is that it feels like a lot of their face molds are, if anything, less diverse than they were in G1. Like, it feels like everyone's been kind of softened down, and also, as someone who has always had a bit of a creaky voice and a lot of vocal fry, I always liked that Twyla had a very, like, creaky voice about her. I don't know, I'm still mad that they gave Twyla a very, like, stereotypical bubbly voice. I like that they made her canonically autistic, but I also feel like it was paired with a lot of infantilization, IMHO. So I don't know, I wish they had handled it better. But that is something I had in mind when designing my Twyla to be extra cozy and having an eye mask for light sensitivity and an ultra cozy, comfortable, baggy outfit. The compilation for this particular slide of Monster High redesigns is pretty empty so far. But since I got so many that they couldn't all fit on one screen, so I had to break them up into individual groups. But you can see the other characters that I've planned to add to this group within the series. So yeah, that was my Twyla redesign. Be sure to let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I'm really happy with how she turned out. Twyla's always been a favorite of mine, and it's always a treat getting to draw her. I think she's super cute. If you like this video, be sure to comment and share, and you can follow me here where I post videos once a month, and you can follow me on Instagram where I post art 3 times a month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!